Right, so I think we might as well kick off. So, hang on, I've got my back to you. Let me just turn my chair a little. In preparing for this discussion, I sent out some notes to our three panelists. And we have a lot going on at UCT at the moment. There are a lot of things happening. And one of the things that I think we need to start thinking about is how we integrate everything, how we, as a collective university, everybody individually taking responsibility for this. And, you know, we're talking about the sort of teaching and learning space here. That's just one space. And so we're interested in thinking about how all of these things going on are going to manifest. What's it going to look like? What would we like it to look like? And what are the barriers and constraints? So I'm going to start by asking Yanganani what your ideal teaching and learning experience looks like.
Before I answer, I'd like to take the opportunity firstly to thank you for inviting me here, Ali. Hi everyone, once again, my name is Yanganani Sibego. I'm a student obviously at UCT, but also I'm an SRC member, outgoing and incoming once again. I think just in terms of my relevance here, I'm the undergraduate academics coordinator, incoming postgraduate academics coordinator now. So what does an ideal teaching and learning look like, especially from the lens or experience that I have been fortunate to gather in my time here? I think an ideal teaching and learning environment definitely does incorporate the best interests of students firstly, but secondly that of the educators as well. So it's kind of like a cohesive and a coherent type of environment in line obviously then with the 2030 vision that UCT has, right? So that then an ideal space for me personally as a student or even just as a person here, I guess, it would be a space that incorporates or understands my social and understands the different spheres that I land in as a student, right? So that being the social sphere, that in terms of transformation, you understanding who I am as an individual in this space. I feel free. I feel like it's a cohesive environment so I can understand myself socially in that social aspect. But also it does then cater or take care of the economic aspect itself, right? So when I'm in this space, I don't necessarily feel excluded in terms of can I keep up with the material? Do I have access to things like that? Just, you know, essentially an equity-based or like an equal-based platform that doesn't necessarily highlight my the economic difference that I might have as a student coming to the institution. So then that's how it falls in the economic sphere. And then, yeah, I think those are the two main ones specifically to cater to that. And then obviously then catering for the educator or the lecturer's experience as well, the courses itself. I think there also then you would also need to look at them because they are human beings at the end of the day. We're all humans here. So you'd have to look at then just those two spheres, so the economic thing and the social sphere and how you cater to those itself. Thank you very much, Ali.
No, I think that's very interesting. So, I mean, clearly this focus on inclusivity is driving a lot of the work. What's your view on what you would like it? And I mean, we're all very jealous of Richard, aren't we, with that building? Let's be honest, but put that aside for now. And what's your response to that, Richard? What's your view?
Yeah, I think to build on, to be perfectly honest, I don't know in the sense of a physical environment. I think the environments that we create need to be flexible enough to allow us to experiment with different modes, different ways of teaching, different ways of allowing students to feel a sense of belonging to the education and sort of a real connection to what they've been taught. And I think these spaces they don't exist at the moment. I mean, a room like this is still very traditional. And I think the concept of flexibility and allowing sort of the future of teaching and learning to emerge, but allowing that allowing the spaces for that emergence to happen, for the experimentations to happen. Because I think in a design process, you have these attributes that you want to ultimately achieve, as many of it were mentioned. What that manifests itself into in the sense of a teaching and learning curriculum or a physical space, we don't know. And so we need to experiment, we need to try and see what works and what doesn't work. So for me, the future teaching and learning environments really are around allowing flexibility and emergence to happen so that we can try things out and see what works and sort of navigate our way through the uncertainty in such a way that it does lead to the sort of the critical outcomes from a graduate attribute perspective, from a sense of belonging and this concept of psychological safety, that anybody that can come into a space feels equal and that they can contribute, and that there's not this sort of hierarchy. I think all these things are components that we all aspire to, but the how is the hard part. And I think that for me is we need to discover it. We need to go down a journey. And we need to be very deliberate about that journey and not start off at the beginning thinking, okay, let's come up with a concept and put everything behind it and build that. It's to allow that solution to emerge and have the patience for that. Patience both from the learners and from academic staff, as well as sponsors, funders, all those. I mean, I think we're quite lucky. Our funder, Hasso Plattner, for the building, the opening we had last week, he mentioned that this building is an attempt to do something. We don't know if it's going to work. So it's the patience of, well, let's try these things and allow us to succeed in maybe some areas, fail in others, but it's all about constant improvement as opposed to proving the right solution.
I mean, one of the things that we spoke about last week was how we can't really experiment in a risk-free environment because we don't have crash test dummies. You know, we can't try something and hope for the best because we're always working in a high-risk environment. Every student matters. And so we need to make sure that whatever we're doing kind of is building in the right direction. And we're not sure where it's going to go unless you, as the Dean of CHED, have a vision and you can tell us a little bit more of it. Nothing like putting your panelist on the spot.
Thanks for that, Ali. I have certain powers. They're very limited at this point, yeah. So, good morning to everybody. I want to just say it's really good to see so many familiar faces in the audience. And it does, make me think about who's in the room at the Teaching and Learning Conference at UCT. It would have been great to see the room packed. So in a sense, many of you have already engaged with the question of what the future, or what the ideal university is and can be through your own work, through your interactions, your scholarship, etc. So in a sense, we are in the right place in this particular moment. I want to just pick up on what both Richard and Yanganani have spoken about, in the sense that there is no formula or recipe for the best. It doesn't exist. And I think the work in progress and aspiring and being inspired to get closer to the truth is actually an ongoing challenge we should embrace. For me, the critical question is, what must be the conditions? What must the conditions be like for us to say we'd like a space that makes us feel included and that we belong? So if you just scratch under the surface, you've got to ask, what is it that we've created that makes staff and students feel that they don't belong and that they're not included? Why is it that in this day and age we call for a humanizing pedagogy, which has to do with minimizing risk, feeling included, etc.? Why is it as human beings we have to make this call? Is it not a default position? for us to be human. So in answering the question, I think that often we think about the university as being something out there. But I think with all of us in this space and with students in our classroom, we have society in here. So there's no us and them really. All the issues that surface are in fact issues that we work with daily as human beings. So the university, or the life that we want to create for the students who are shaped and go back into society, should be exactly the kinds of values and principles that we hold dear. And there's no recipe for that either. The best we can do is to create the conditions for those optimal principles to be enacted and embodied. And it then begs the question, well, what is it that we hold dear? Have we been explicit about that? Right? We've named social justice. We've spoken about ethical values. Decolonization is a philosophical and social justice dimension. But have we really internalized and understood what that means when it translates into the teaching and learning? So I think it's a very personal, a very professional, very political, and very social endeavor to be a higher education academic today. So it is about the process of finding that university you speak about, Ali, and not arriving at that architectural plan.
Yes, so, I mean, let's just think about all of the different drivers that we have. And, you know, I mean, the world has gone quite mad and is becoming increasingly divisive, I think. Just look at the current situation in Europe. So we have this big focus on a fair and just society. So if we want to produce graduates who themselves have come through an inclusive environment, a supportive environment, we want those graduates to be able to change society, because I do think that there is a need, you know, for us to be thinking about the kind of roles that we want them to be able to play. And, you know, I'm in the commerce faculty, and often we're thinking about we need to produce graduates who are meeting business needs or meeting government needs, meeting current needs. But what about future needs? We need to be educating students to fulfill roles and take the lead in situations we are not yet aware of. And that's the challenge. And, you know, talk a little bit about your spaces in the new building, because, you know, I mean, I'm often frustrated, and those of you who teach will know exactly where I'm coming from. You're giving a lecture in a venue like this, and there's an opportunity for you to get students to talk to each other. And you spend 10 minutes trying to get them to, they're climbing over the desks, someone's sitting on the row below, and, you know, it's a monstrous thing to try and create that engagement often in a venue like this. And we all know that we are just given a venue at the beginning of the year. It doesn't really matter what methodology you want to bring into your teaching. If you're here and you've got to make the best of it. So I'm thinking about spaces and, you know, enablers for us to kind of go on this journey where we know we're getting a sense of it being supportive and it's working for us. So can you just talk about that, Richard, how you've built that unknowingness in to that space?
So I mean, our main focus at the D School is teaching students or exposing students to the mindsets and practice of a design-led approach. And there's a number of principles that sit behind that. And for us, it was important to build a space which drives those behaviors. So we look at the spaces in the D school as a laboratory where every piece of furniture is actually there to drive the behavior that we're trying to teach. So in the design, in our sort of programs that we run, we focus a lot on collaboration and co-creation, getting students to be comfortable with uncertainty, to make decisions based on incomplete data, to work across different disciplines. So we have students from a science background working with students in a law background, and they have different professional languages. They've been taught to think differently over their undergraduate period of time, and the cultural differences that we have as well in this country, and so we're trying to teach the students how to work across these sort of barriers, which is the reality of the world when they get out there, as you were saying. You know, you're going to find yourself in environments and in teams where you're going to have to work across different disciplines, across different cultures, across different languages, and so we're teaching this through our programs, but the physical space is a critical part of that experience. And so we're experimenting ourselves as we go along, but it is about building an environment where the spaces are flexible. So a student comes in, they have to almost design their own space that they want to use on that day. And that encourages a behavior of, okay, I've actually got the ability to create something. So you're kind of reinforcing that that natural creativity, that creative confidence in people. The types of furniture, or be them reasonably uncomfortable, is there to encourage collaboration and break down the sort of the barriers of people that maybe might dominate a conversation. A lot of use of vertical space. So the physical environment for us is such a critical part, and I think that, and it depends what you're teaching. So at a university, it's not one size fits all. You know, at a lecture theatre like this, it might work for certain pedagogies or certain content or certain knowledge that you want to pass on to students, but it might not work for another course. And you know, so when you're booking venues, you sort of sometimes you don't actually land up with a space that's ideal. We've tried to teach in this environment. Before we built the D school, we would teach in it, and it just didn't work. You could immediately see that the students were not learning the mindsets in that short period of time that we wanted to bring across. And I think, yeah, so I think for us, the spaces we work in, one must look so carefully at every aspect of it, the lighting, the sound, the furniture, and is it enhancing the behavior or the pedagogy or the knowledge that we're trying to pass over. Same in technology. I think, you know, online, there's a lot of advantages online. There's a lot of content that you can deliver well online, but it has its limitations. And so I think for me, it's also looking at the hybrid space of physical and online, and you know, looking what's best to deliver in that space, what's not best to, and what are the spaces that we need to create.
Do you have any comment on that, Kasturi?
I think the notion of enhancing is critical. You know, I think the furniture, the ability to change spaces, to use online and hybrid are important to enhance the experience, but it goes back to what we understand by the teaching and learning relationship and who's in the classroom. I mean, I'm just using a caricature here, Richard. We could have the best possible furniture in the room and still reproduce very dominant hegemonies about who's in power, who's the teacher. We could instruct students to create groups in ways that we want to. So it needs deep sort of, you know, reflection on what we understand teaching and learning to mean in the African context, in the South African context, with all the cultural diversity. How do we hold everything and the specific together? You know, so the specific being perhaps a disciplinary pedagogy, where there are particular ways in which you want to model for your students how to think, be, know, read, write the discipline, but at the same time to embrace issues of inclusivity. How is language being used as a divisive, you know, marker? How are we responding to our understandings of gender and how that's, embodied. So I think it's no longer a case of just the material. For me, it's the social and, to an extent, the spiritual that we engage in thinking about teaching and learning beyond employability and graduate attributes. And I'm not saying that those are not important, but if we fall into the trap of producing graduates for the economy, that's a very different approach to teaching and learning. If you're thinking about creating whole citizens who can go out into society and make really good decisions and enact those decisions in ways that create a whole new place, it really does affect how you come into the physics classroom or the maths classroom. And these things are not divorced from the social. Because we're not changing, the theorems and Einstein's theory of relativity, doesn't mean we can't infuse it with social values that create a society that we want. So I think the furniture and the space and all of that help us to create this thing. But it goes back to each and every one of us in this room to interrogate the ways in which we have been socialized into teaching and learning. How much of that are we reproducing uncritically? And then to ask, well, if this is what I consider the teaching and learning relationship to be, what kind of space do I need in order to enhance that? So for me, it is about a personal and professional project when we sign up at higher education. What is it to do? Build a personal empire and profile through my research publications? Is it to shift the needle on how students are succeeding? It's about reckoning with what that means for you, and then taking what's out there and translating it into a kind of pedagogy that allows you to do that. Yeah.
Thank you guys. Let's move off the space a little bit now. And Yanganani, I'm going to put you on the spot again. Can you talk to us about any time you've experienced in a classroom where you have felt that you really matter?
Thank you very much for that question. Actually, I think it's important to give context, especially in the broader space, as how we students experience it once we're sitting down. And I think it actually links to what was just said now about how the space, it transcends beyond just sitting in a classroom. The physical really does matter. So how I get into the classroom and sit down, it matters a lot. I remember it was my first year. For those who don't know, it was 2020, just before COVID struck. So I don't necessarily have a lot of high school, university experience before this year. And it was a Politics 1004 F class taught by Dr. Lushaba, Dr. Lwazi Lushaba. That class was very brilliant, actually. It was very challenging. It was very mind-awakening as well. And I remember I had recently been given the opportunity to even be part of the namings of building committee in the institution. So the important role that that class played, it really assisted in terms of conscientizing me as a first-year student who's entering the space for the first time. And also it did assist and allow me to realize that the way to decolonize the institution is through the involvement of students specifically and through students being vocal. So even though I was a first-year kid, I was able to be vocal in the namings of the building committee. I was able to contribute substance when they were debating motions such as obviously the removal of the statue, then the renaming of the former SMATS residence, which is the upper campus residence now. So I do think that just in terms of that, just tying it back as well, the physical plays an important role and the students play an important role in contributing to making the physical best, you know, for the teaching and learning space overall at the end of the day. Because had I not been in that classroom, had I not experienced that 1004 F experience, I don't think I would have seen the value that I play as a student, and or to be able to take what I've learned in class and to be able to apply it specifically then in a different role or aspect in the institution, linking it as well to what Tato Pura always likes to say. It links to the DSA 2030 vision as well, which makes sure that it understands that a student is encompassed of more than just, as Kasturicha said, more than just a human being or a body or a shell. You are a spirit as well in that. And you also have a mind, obviously. You are made of many dimensions that all contributes. And the institution then, how do you allow the institution to encompass all of that and to push it forward into one direction? I think just briefly cutting off now, that was my first year experience and how I contributed to the institution, essentially playing a role in the decolonization process when I was deployed to that committee. Thank you.
I think that's a very interesting point. So you were given the power and the authority to make changes. So somebody believed in you, and that gave you the freedom and the confidence to do so much more, and then to contribute back to the university. I mean, I think that's a really important thing for us all to think about, is the power in the teaching and learning environment. And when you give the power away, it's amazing what happens, I think. And, you know, we're all doing course evaluations at the moment. And, you know, one of the things that I like to ask my students is how motivated they are in my course to do their best. I'm really interested in knowing that, because I think if we can get students really engaged in all of this, we're going to really start to see what it means to achieve a vision. You know, and a vision is always unfolding and will change and so on. But I mean, I think that's it. It's about everyone thinking about what they can do to start working towards this really inclusive environment. Yes?
I think power is such a difficult concept to break down. I mean, there's power that is, in a sense, unearned, right? So just by virtue of us sitting in this panel, already there are differentials in power. If I was not sitting here with the title of dean, I might have had less power, right? So it's recognizing what power already exists. So it's not about giving or taking the power. It's about how we're working with power as a concept. And if it's not productive power, then what power is it? And I think that the university we're working towards should not be vested in whether one teacher believes in you, or one academic sees the light, or that I feel invested. I think the conditions we should create is that we can own that space in ways that are legitimate and equal. And it's not at the behest of somebody who happens to take an interest. And I think herein lies the challenge. I'm not convinced that we are tapping into our students' potential in the ways that recognize them as whole beings. There's a very kind of paternalistic, even maternalistic, attitude to students not yet arriving, not yet having all their ducks in a row. And so we take on, and that begs a question of what expertise means. We have a very trained expertise. We might not have dimensions that come together to understand the diversity. We've said up until now, and I think it's almost cliche, that in teaching and learning environments and at university, context matters, right? And we've said it so many times, I'm not sure that we're actually paying attention. What about the context? I think context has a lot of texture, and maybe contexture is what we're aiming for. What are the gradations of texture that I need to take care of in my classroom. And I can't reproduce that, 45 minutes later, because I've got a whole new set of students. And even if there are 1,000 students in the class, engaging with students doesn't mean I need to have a 5-minute conversation. It's about understanding how the pedagogy recognizes, affirms, validates, and those are the ways in which we need to be really, just expanding the envelope on what teaching and learning means. Yeah, I'm talking too much now.
No, I think it's an interesting question. So really what you're talking about is creating the conditions for this and creating the context, really. And, we're so few, aren't we, really? How do we move the whole university in that direction? How do we get all of this stuff to happen? What's your thinking on that? How we actually create that context that you're talking about?
So I'll have a little stab at that, but my frame of reference, so my background is design. I went through a traditional design education where we were taught as designers to be the experts, to the ones to look at a problem and be seen as the ones that would come up with a solution. But the reality of the world of the last 20 years is the challenges that we were faced with as designers were far too complex for a designer or a single discipline to deal with. And it got to a point where design couldn't just be left up to individuals to work out, sort of professionally trained individuals. And this concept of moving away from designing for people to designing with, so that co-creation, where designers had to start to play more of a facilitation type role, and the solution would actually lie in the diversity of the thinking around the table, and the innovation sits in the diversity of the thinking around the table. So in the design profession, we have to, and they're still struggling today, but to let go of the fact that I am the expert. I've been trained as the expert, and to adopt a philosophy that design is too important to be left up to the designers, that it's actually something everybody needs to be part of. And in my sort of last 5 years being at the University of Cape Town and being now in an educational space, I see sort of a similar philosophy that education is too important to be left up to the educators. It's something that we have to co-create. We have to bring in the students, the parents, the whole, in some ways, the whole community, the whole ecosystem, and get all those perspectives. And whether it's in curriculum design or whether it's in how we teach in the pedagogy, I think that concept of how we're going to do it with people as a collective, as opposed to educators being the ones that have to come up with a solution.
So it's really about a shared philosophy across the entire university. I mean, everybody involved needs really to understand that, I think. And I mean, once maybe we can really understand what that is, it'll be much easier for us to achieve that kind of context that you're talking about.
I think so, absolutely. I think the further challenge is that we have been socialized into an academic space, again, and I've said this already, that is very individualistic, that we are calling for co-creation and collaborative, and also begs the question, how do we manage for lecturers and for academics anyway, a very individualistic profile building that you're on a path from the time you start, through the ad hominems, through the HR 174. Everything is about what am I doing, how can I perform it, how can it be counted, where will it count, how can I impress upon, etc. So even, I'd go as far as to say that sometimes when we design inclusive, socially just interventions, we are thinking, well, how will this earn me some kudos, right? How will this translate into demonstrating that I'm really a social justice person. Most people working in social justice don't wear the banner. They don't have to say it because the work speaks so, you know, in such volumes. You don't have to announce it every time you do something. So how to work in a university, and this is not just UCT, this is across the world, where you have the hierarchy, which is bureaucratic and is designed as such, right, for all the processes to work well. And then we buy into that to some extent, because when we become HODs and deans, we almost reproduce that, right? So we have the power, then you delegate the power, and the one at the bottom, you have no power, so you do as I say. You know, what about the leadership? How do we embody these roles? Are we doing things differently? You know, is there shared leadership? These are all aspirations, and we write about them prolifically, but I haven't seen them in action in the ways that we need. So, for me, the challenge is, as in nature, how can you be the part and the whole at the same time? Not Gestalt. Not the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. How can you carry in your DNA, pedagogy, etc., a slice of the bigger picture, while the bigger picture is being envisaged and created? So I think we need to have these interrogations, these reflections. We don't have enough of this. And I think, forgive me, but I think on the science, engineering side of life, this is not giving us a solution. So it's a paradigmatic difference in the way we approach the problem. And from my engineering colleagues, I think there's a tendency to go, show me the solution, what's the next steps? I don't want to sit around and talk and talk and talk. And then on the humanities side, very much, you generate knowledge by talking, by reflecting. They're absolutely different disciplinary ways of going about things. One is not better or worse, right? We're now moving into the trend, I dare say, of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, and I've heard it so often. I'm not sure we know what that means. I'm not sure. You know, does transdisciplinarity mean you bring all the disciplines together and they stand side by side, and then when I run a program, I do 1 week, you do 1 week, you do the other, transdisciplinary. Okay? So it's about taking on a new concept, having these deep conversations in your faculties, understanding how does this translate when I go into an auditorium that is set up like this? How might I mediate this? How does my disciplinary understanding help me to mediate? Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point. We've been yakking away for 40 minutes, if you can believe it. Sorry, not yakking, providing incredibly insightful comments. And before we share the power, or hand the power over, is there anything more that you'd like to add before we open up to the floor for questions? No. Is anyone going to ask a question while we're on this interesting topic? Would you like to ask a question of the audience? Oh, wow. Are you going to, we've got a question, a couple of questions up there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to say I'm Teresa Lorenzo, so I'll break the space and people who don't know me know me. I'm from the Health Science faculty in a probably interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary academic space of disability studies. And it's not disability services, as people often think. It's actually trying to understand how we create a space that disabled people feel included, and how we, all our teaching and learning and whatever we're doing here, research, enables us to also recognize their abilities. So that was just in way of introduction. My comment is, I'm very excited if this is how we're going to take the Teaching and Learning Conference forward, Kasturi, in terms of really interrogating what we're saying. Because, Yanganani, yesterday I had the wonderful opportunity to hear Lawazi talk for half an hour. And I came in the conversations, the launch of the UCT conversations that Elawani did on, and yesterday it was anti-racism. And he blew my mind, because we've been teaching intersectionality for the last 10 years or 15 years in disability studies and thinking it was wow. And now he told us this was like old school and not possible, because we are whole beings and we can't be everything at once. I'm a white, female, so-called able-bodied in the moment. I'm not all those different things, and I think we haven't spoken enough about spirituality either. So we divorce all these things. So I don't have the answers, but I'm very excited about whether we really are able to open up a space for students to take the lead. And for, I mean, it's Paulo Freire's pedagogy anyway. But we talk it, I talk it, but I don't know how much we actually do it.
Thank you for that. And I've also started saying I'm able-bodied at the moment, because it could all in 2 minutes, you know. Anyway, thank you for that comment. Next question.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's for Keenan Hendrickse from Sociology. Just, I suppose it's for Kasturi. I mean, when we speak about the one-directional nature of education, I mean, and it's not just teaching and learning. I think we then speak about every aspect of it. I mean, in terms of governance, we elect people onto committees every 4 years. We choose people for positions every 5 years, and then expect that things will happen, and I suppose over the last 6 years we've seen that they don't necessarily happen effectively. When that it includes the research space, it includes the teaching space. So what? And I suppose it's an act of political will. I don't think that we have the political will to change the university at the moment, besides having important but seemingly cute conversations. So what is required for us to almost insert that kind of political will into having that ontological shift at every level of the university? Yeah.
Difficult one. I think, in short, it is about embracing a disposition that changes the cute conversations to acute conversations, and understanding what the consequences are and what it means for each of us to take that on. So while there might be political will or other kinds of enablers, at the end of the day, it's still about each of us, students and staff alike, reckoning with what it is we are here to do. For me, that is the will that needs to be reckoned with. Is it about a job? Is it about money? What is that about? And I'm not sure, and I don't think the answer is that all of us have to share that will and view, and, you know, we all have to be on the same page. But I think we have romanticized diversity to such an extent that we don't know how to understand the nuances, and that, yeah, as parts of the whole, everyone's will matters and counts. But in the balance of power, in terms of what we need to change, who might need to step back a bit? Who needs to step forward? And in the dance, in the next 5 years, could we switch places because there's a new will and a new goal? So I think it is a dance. It's about understanding the rhythm, the music, the steps, and how is it that how can we create that dance that is going to speak to that moment and then move from there? I don't know, I think it's a roundabout way of saying, there is no answer. So the question right back at you, and you, and you, and you, and you know?
Yanganani has a comment.
Yes, just to add on to what was just said, actually, I think we must not focus rather on the politicization of the university space or students and lecturers and the teaching and learning space, but rather the conscientization. The reason why I say that now is because the political climate, as Kusturi just said, it's constantly evolving and constantly changing, and that's why we always fixated or romanticize like concepts such as diversity. We're stuck on 2010 concepts such as the Rainbow Nation because we refuse to progress forward. What's important is when you conscientize someone, you allow them to be able to adapt, and you empower them then to be able to shift as the climates are changing. So I think there needs to be a shift in terms of conscientization in the institution, and that then hasn't necessarily been at its best because of factors such as COVID-19, et cetera, et cetera. So I think just moving forward, maybe we should focus rather on the conscientization aspect going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, another question. Sorry, were you next? I'm not terribly good. In fact, I'm pretty blind. I'm sorry.
The question's over here.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much.
Hi, Ali. I'm Lebogang from the marketing section. There's actually a lot, but first, thank you all for sharing your minds with us. I've been furiously writing on a notepad, and I just wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude in those ways. Of the many things I'd wanted to share, the one thing I'm really thinking about is I recently saw this thing of how primary schools are getting, there's a particular primary school that's getting rid of the idea of family trees. And instead of doing family trees, they're doing a community circle. In this way, this allows you to include who you want to include and not have these like particular, you know, like maybe you have to include a step parent you don't want or a grandparent you're not close to, etc. And I think about that with the education project that we've had, this teaching and learning project, and we're like, the academic staff, the students, the sponsors, but the education project also includes like the support staff. It includes like the service staff who make sure that we can be in these venues and they let us have the dignity of these spaces that we occupy. So when you start almost like creating community of an education project instead of, still investing in these hierarchies of who or where or how certain things are important, I think that's a great way as like a point of departure. But I'm not even impressed by the idea of community. I think to equity and justice is more where I'd like these conversations to land, because we're saying like, in Europe, we're seeing like this growth in disjointedness, but no, these systems have been there that allow for the rise of fascism and Nazism, of course. But if we have these conversations of like, or these real considerations of who gets power, privilege, and protection, and we move that as a circle of a community for now of our our centric way, I think that would be a great way to start considering what we call the education project and who is involved in it, and then ways in which we can develop from it. So these are like one of the things that I was considering, but it's something that came from the considerations of the space. Yes, inclusion, yes, belonging, yes, safe spaces, but equity, justice, some real hardcore things that don't require me, the young black woman who may be queer presenting, to hold the line or the space and then do it again and then do it again in another year, but that it becomes a structural, systemic way of being, as opposed to a, oh, hey, you all showed up today, this is really great, but we're not even a fraction of the percentage of the people who can, should have the privilege, power, protection to do so without, retaliation or retribution.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that comment. Any response? No, thank you. I mean, I also want us to think about the timetable. I want us to think about the academic calendar. All of these different parts of the university need to be thinking about this. It's not just the classroom experience, especially when we start talking about power and equity, So, yeah, it's much bigger than teaching and learning. We've got a couple more minutes. Is there another question? Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to try to be brief because I'm conscious of time. But my name is Kanyo. I think I'm the only undergraduate student here other than Yanganani. And I think that goes to the point I want to raise about how do we actually move from like this way of teaching and learning that's very formal and teaching us what is and what we need to do to be active commodities in the economy, to a more critical, like centering critical studies about the sort of society that we want to create, about the sort of people that we want to push into the society and in terms of knowledge production. And I raise this point to say that there seems to me in my years in the institution that there's no focus on knowledge production at the undergraduate level. Knowledge production seems to be the preserve of academics, our lecturers and postgraduate students. And how does that capacitate us as students to be intellectual? We find that at the pedagogical level, Paulo Freire writes like in the 60s about how our education is very input and output, and to this day in 2022 we still have the same education model. In terms of the substance of the things that we're taught, we find that actually who is actually involved in creating the content and what is the goal of that content and how that like translates into the society that we're creating. I'm glad that the father of the Dean School raised the point about not necessarily wanting to have the answers. It's important, I think I read this somewhere in terms of decoloniality, that decoloniality centers more about asking the questions as opposed to finding the solutions. And then what that allows us to do is ask ourselves the question that are we okay with not finding the answers and leaving that empty space to students, to intellectuals, to all the stakeholders in developing those solutions for ourselves. And how does that look like? It might seem risky and scary, but nothing worth doing is a safe endeavor. And then just at a practical level, we then critically have to ask ourselves the question about when we have conversations like this, where are the students? Why are the students not here? Is it conducive and convenient to have a teaching and learning conference at the height of academic pressure, at the end of exam preparation, so much so that we are having a conversation about pedagogy and teaching and learning with only 2 undergraduate students? And then I think Mother Kasturi raised the point about how some power is unearned and how that translates to how the people that excel in teaching and learning and students are always at the behest of one individual that chooses, oh, this one, I see potential in them. Why is it that not every undergraduate student has that potential and can either decide to go into academia and teaching and learning and contribute to knowledge production? And those are the critical questions that we need to ask ourselves in structuring a teaching and learning environment that's inclusive for all. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and also for giving up your time at an incredibly busy and difficult period for you in the year. I think this is the last question. Ortobis never going to ask me to do this again, which is probably not a bad thing.
Thank you. Richard from Department of Knowledge and Information Stewardship and Faculty of Humanities. I really want to thank our last speaker. Great to see students here. the first part of the panel discussion got me really uncomfortable because I was thinking about resources. We're talking about all this wonderful space, creating these spaces, having these spaces, creating these capabilities. Where is the money going to come from to do this? How are we going to invest in the people to do this? Where we're going to find the funding for our students to identify students who really need the support and to take them through the journey from being in a completely underprivileged educational system into being able to have the confidence to encounter the educational sphere at this level. And here we sit in a state of constant austerity with austerity fatigue. And with some of also considering that a lot of our funding is coming from people who are expecting us to produce for industry and leading to this idea of commodification of education. That made me feel very, very uncomfortable. But I started to feel towards later on in the panel discussion that the resilience and the innovation that we have, and that has been proved to us, and the ideas that have been opened to us are very inspiring. So thank you. We can do a lot of this without the huge investments in technology or space or whatever is required. A change in attitude, I think, from everybody, led by the people in this room, might be what gets us there. Thank you.
That's a wonderful closing comment. I'd like to thank our panelists very much for your time, a wonderful conversation, and to wish you all a fabulous couple of days. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.